Okay, so we are going to get going in our ICD coding. You actually have a paper book for this textbook, so you will need that book out in front of you so that you can familiarize yourself with how this book works. And I'm going to run through how to read it, how to use it, and how to get going at being a coder. We code in every module. So the more you do, the better you get. The more you do, the faster you get. So please don't think that you have to be an expert here in your first or second module. You have a lot of time here at Ross before you are going out into the real world. And so you will get better and better and better in every module. So in every module, you will have some kind of a lecture like this. I call it Intro to ICD because every module we have somebody new in the classroom who doesn't know what this is, so we have to start back at the beginning. I always find that students in their second module get more out of this lecture because you have some basis of knowledge already, and so when you hear this explained to you again, you'll be like, oh, that makes total sense. Those of you who are brand new, just starting today, these concepts may seem very abstract to you, and if you only mostly get it, you're doing exactly fine. That's right where you should be. The more you do, the more it makes sense, okay? And a lot of us are hands-on learners, meaning give me some to do and I'll get it once we get going. So this lecture part, you're like, okay, I'm getting it. I'm going to go ahead and turn the web camera off. Just so that we have the full screen to work with. Okay. All right, so the cover of your coding book does contain the year. My digital copy is a 2019. Many of you already have the 2020 version of the book. The only difference is that there are some codes that update every year. So if you have the 2020 version book, you have the more updated version than what I have on the screen. But in a classroom setting, that doesn't matter. We're learning theory, and the theory does not change from year to year. So don't worry if your book is a 2019 like mine. Honestly, we could be using 2015 books, and we would still be able to learn this material. Okay, so in the real world, you will need new books every year. Hopefully, your doctor is providing that for you. Unless you're a self-employed kind of person, you shouldn't have to be paying for this yourself. And your doctor really needs to buy these every year because you're only as good at your job as the materials you are given. And so if your doctor expects you to be successful with outdated materials, that's kind of a problem. So definitely advocate for yourself and get new books every year. It will definitely make your life a lot easier. So students will ask, okay, what is coding? That's just kind of a random word at this point that doesn't mean anything. Coding is the process of translating the doctor's words into an alphanumeric representation of those words. So the doctor will come up with the patient's diagnosis, and we know what procedures were performed. Those are the words that we're translating into a code. This book, ICD, is for the diagnosis. This book contains all of the things that are wrong with the patient. That's why it's such a big book, because there are so many different diagnoses that are possible. ICD literally stands for International Classification of Disease, and I always drill my more senior students at this point and have them define that for me because by the time you graduate, you need to know what those letters mean. 10 stands for version 10. We converted from version 9 to version 10 back in 2015. I can't believe we're at the 5-year mark. It seems like yesterday. And then clinical modification, CM, means that we have converted the international version to being the United States version. And that CM makes it the United States version. Okay. There are many different parts to this book, and we're not going to cover them all in one setting. We're going to kind of introduce the basics today. And in your book, if you flip to literally page 1, there's a whole bunch of pages with your Roman numerals. Get past all those, and literally page 1 should look like this. However, if you have the 2020 book, yours should say Internet Official Guidelines in Coding and Reporting 2020. Mine, of course, says 2019. You will see this abbreviated throughout our textbook as OGCR. This is what they're talking about, the Official Guidelines for Coding and Reporting. This is your rule book. This is your rule book. This is where all of the guidelines, rules, and the ways you do this come from. This is a great reference. I'm going to just flip ahead a couple of pages, get past the index. Okay. So these are all some of the things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about using the word and. We're going to talk about C. We're going to talk about code also. All of the rules come from the guidelines. Now, it's kind of a dry read. If you sit down and read the guidelines straight through, it's kind of dull. So that's why we don't actually teach directly from here. However, if you decide at the end of your time at Ross that coding is really something that you want to pursue, and it's something that very, very interests you, you at some point are going to read all those guidelines. Probably not all in one sitting. So in your book that you've got in front of you, the front part of your book is called the index. And go ahead and open to the index. And it's those gray-edged pages towards the front of your book. And it does not matter which page you have it open to. I alphabetically looked up the word neuritis, Neuritis. Okay, just because we're in the brain module, trying to use examples that are fitting for our module that we're in. So flip through that index, and you can see there are alphabetical guidelines here at the top of the page telling you what words are on that page. So you can hopefully flip the pages a little quicker and flip and find the word neuritis, Neuritis. Okay. And if you are in the 2019 version of the book, I'm on page 350. If you're in the 2020 version of the book, you're going to be somewhat close to that page number, but it may be a page or two off, just because you have different things in your book. Okay, so neuritis starts right here. Okay, and you can see that some of the words are in red, some of the words are in black. The red is what is in alphabetical index, or alphabetical order. So we have neuritis, followed by a neuroastrocytoma, followed by neuroavitaminosis, et cetera, all these neuro words. And they're all the ones in red. However, some categories have more than one kind of that disease, and that's the part that's in black ink. So over here we have neuroma, and all of these are the kinds of neuroma there is before you move on to the next word that's in red. So you always want to look up your main word of what is wrong with the patient. So if the patient has, let's get an example here. If your patient here has this optic neuroma, optic describes what kind of neuroma or the location of the neuroma. You're going to look up neuroma being the main word of what is wrong with the patient, and the optic is an adjective describing what kind of neuroma it is. So you always want to start with the main word and then move to the adjectives. Here in the ICD book, never ever, ever look up a body part. You will not find what you need at the body part. Again, the body part describes the location of what's wrong with the patient. The body part does not say what is wrong with the patient. So never look up a body part, or you will not find what you need. So it is kind of a little bit of a skill to learn the best words to look up, but it is a skill you will develop over time, and you'll actually have that pretty well in control in no time. Okay, so we look at, we look up the main word, then we find any qualifying terms that better describe that disease, and you can see that there is some kind of a letter number combination next to each line, giving you an idea of what the code might be. So, on our page, I'm going to switch to a different color. On our page, you can see lots of red dots all over the page. Anytime you see a symbol, there is a definition of symbols at the bottom of every page. So that red dot or bullet says to use an additional character. That means there's something more that goes on that code. Okay, so make sure that you are paying attention to that and following the directions. So again, I'm going to look at this. I'm actually going to go back over here to neuritis, and I'm going to look up facial neuritis right over here. And next to facial neuritis, it tells me G51.8. So let's talk about what an ICD code looks like. If you look at the page that you have open, every code option on this entire page starts with a letter. So every code begins with a letter. Okay, rule number 1. Letters can be anywhere from A to Z. Your whole book, the whole alphabet is used. Okay. Now, if you look at this page, most of our codes start with the letter G. That's because that's where you find the nervous system codes. However, I see some A's, I see some H's, I see some T's. It's not an exclusive club. They can be in other sections if there's a reason for that to be, but most of our nervous system codes are G codes. Okay, every code begins with a letter. Every code must have a minimum of 3 digits. Codes cannot be shorter than 3 digits. The first digit is always a letter. The second digit always has to be a number. After the second digit, anything goes. However, most of the time, the rest of the digits are all numbers as well. However, they throw in some letters sometimes to throw us. After the third digit comes a decimal point. Okay. So if you look at the page that you have up, if there are more than 3 digits in the code, you can see there's always a decimal point after the third digit, every time. Okay. And then codes can be a maximum of 7 digits or 7 characters. Change that to characters. 7 characters, that's the biggest it can get. So if I wanted, my code could be G12.1234. That's 7 digits long. Okay. That's the biggest it can get. But it can be anywhere between 3 and 7. Depends on how many digits are needed for the code that you're looking for. Coding uses the concept of coding to the highest specificity. That means we're going to go as many digits as it takes to fully explain the patient's disease. Okay, so we look at this facial nerve down here that I had marked. We see a G51.8. So we're done, right? That's our code? No, we're not done yet. That is the start of finding our code. We look at that and go, we think this might be our answer. But now we need to go to the back part of your code book, the pages with the colored pages, the colorful pages, and we're going to find the G codes, and we're going to look up that code G51.8. I actually had it bookmarked for myself. So go ahead and flip to your back pages. It looks like it's going to be in the pages that are orange. And find code G51.8. In my 2019 version of the book, I'm on page 791. In the 2020 version of the book, you'll be close to that, but it may not be exact. So find your G51. And I have this whole G51 section, and my G51.8 is right here, other disorders of the facial nerve. Okay. All right. So if you need more time to get to the page, go ahead and pause the video, but I'm going to go ahead and continue on. So my back section told me, or my alphabetical index told me G51.8. I go here, I find my G51.8, and I go, okay, now what? What did this even do for me? Why did I even need to come back here? Okay, it's a very fair question. I always tell my students that you have to look at this page with really big eyes, meaning do not look at this and focus only on the G51.8. You have to look at the whole G51 section. Going back to the top of it, G51 here is the beginning of the section, has the big bullet that tells me additional digits are needed. Okay, great. And these are all the facial nerve disorders. So G51.0 is called Bell's palsy. G51.1, geniculate, I don't know how to pronounce that one, ganglionitis. Then we have Melkerson's syndrome, whatever that is. Then we have hemifacial spasm. Okay, are you having twitching? And then we get down to the other G51.8, the other disorders, means it does not match any of those that are already in the G51 section. Well, oftentimes, neuritis of the facial nerve is Bell's palsy. So is that what your doctor really meant to say, and you should be using G51.0? I don't know. Read the patient chart and figure it out. But if doctor didn't use that word, then maybe you can't use that word either, and our G51.8 would be the correct answer. Okay. I want to talk about what else we see on this page. Okay. What we see on this page is a whole bunch of codes that are in this nervous system section, but there are several concepts that I want to talk about. I want to talk about this excludes one comment over here that's part of G54. Excludes one means you're in the wrong place. If I could get my fingers to work. You're in the wrong place. So I look at the G54 codes, which are for brachial plexus disorders, etc. And I look at everything listed here in this G54 excludes one statement. And I read those and go, wait a second. This spondylosis, that is what I'm looking for. This radiculitis, that is what I'm looking for. So if you find the code that you really were looking for listed in that excludes one, you're in the wrong place. And it tells you where you should be. However, maybe you read all those and go, no, I didn't want any of those, which means you are in the right place. So I always tell my students, read and either follow the directions or read it and reject it. You have to consider it, though, every time. Okay. So if you were looking for something that was in that excludes one, then follow that pathway it's giving you. But if you weren't looking for that, you're good to go. Stay where you are. Okay. You can never, ever code these together, meaning anything in that excludes one, whoops, turn my typing off. Anything listed in the excludes one list cannot be combined with a code from where you are. Does that make sense? I don't think it makes sense. So meaning, if I wanted to code this G540, I cannot combine it with any of these codes and have it be acceptable. They cannot be combined together ever. Okay. All right, looking at your same page, look at that. We have an excludes to statement up here. Excludes to means something else. Excludes to means not included here. What does that mean? It means that the patient can have both conditions at the same time. Meaning you can code these diagnoses together. So you're looking at this diagnosis of the other cranial nerves. You like this code G522, and our patient also has this disorder of the acoustic eighth nerve. The patient has both of them. Guess what? We can code the G52 and the H93.3 can be coded together. If that was an excludes one statement, they could not be coded together. The rules are different. They mean two completely different things. Okay, so continuing on, the codes that are in that code book you have in front of you, I told you can start with any letter from A to Z, and here's a breakdown of kind of how the book is organized. And so I told you everything here dealing with the brain and the nervous system are going to be your G codes, which they're listed right here. Okay. You do not have to memorize this list in any way, but the longer you work in the industry, the more you will have it memorized just over time. Most of your codes are separated based on the body part areas that it's pertaining to. So you can see the nervous system, the eye, the ear, the circulation, the digestive, etc. Then some of the chapters, though, are separated by what's called etiology. Etiology, the origin of disease, meaning what caused the disease. So they clump it together. And a perfect example of etiology is this neoplasm chapter up here at the top, or infectious diseases up here at the top. So a patient can have a cancerous tumor anywhere in their body. So rather than having cancer sprinkled into every chapter, they actually gathered up all the tumors and put it into the neoplasm chapter. We also can have infectious disease throughout our whole body. We can have like a staph or a strep infection all over. And so rather than, again, having it sprinkled throughout everything, they gather it up and put it all here in one chapter. The next concept I want to talk about is the word and the word with. And ICD kind of came along and redefined the English language. So, the word and actually means or. If you were to try to diagnose or look up a code for tonsillitis, you'll find it in the alphabetical index, you'll look it up in the code section, and you will find a code for tonsillitis and adenoiditis. Well, you look at your patient's chart and you say the patient doesn't have adenoiditis. How can I use this code that says that they have both conditions when they really only have one of those conditions? The answer to that is that the word and doesn't mean and, it means or. So it actually means tonsillitis or adenoiditis. Both conditions are coded at this code. Okay. So they changed the word of the word and, or changed the meaning. Then we have the word with. With means that the two conditions are tied together, that these conditions are existing in the patient at the same time. And so they use the example here of diabetes with some other condition. And it means that those two one kind of caused the other, or one is making the other one to be worse. All right, the next concept I want to talk about is the word include, which you see right here. And sometimes it actually says the word include, and other times it just lists things under it without actually printing the word include. They mean the exact same thing. What they're doing is giving you alternate words that mean the same thing. And the reason they do this is that we all are going to end up working for different doctors. Different doctors use different words, but they mean the same thing. So, for example, your doctor may call it Bell's palsy, but another doctor calls it facial palsy. It means the exact same thing. So they're giving you a whole bunch of other words that mean the exact same thing. That does not mean your doctor has to use all of those words. If that doctor used either version of that word, you're in the right place. So that's your includes. It's just giving you alternate words of what it might mean. Okay. The last two concepts before we actually get into some coding practice I want to talk about is right here, the code also. When it says to code also, it means the code you're looking at is coded first, and the also code is second. Sometimes you will see that also say as use additional code. Okay. Code also and use additional code are telling you the exact same thing. It means that the code you're looking at is first and the other code needs to come second. The other way that you will see is that it will say this, code first the underlying disease. Code first means the code you're looking at is coded second, and the other code comes first. Okay, because order matters. So when it tells you to code first something else, the code you're looking at is the one that needs to go second, and the other code will go before it. Okay. So those are giving you hints for the order. Okay. Now, every instructor at Ross can have a different philosophy on this, so definitely when you get back into the campus, check with your own campus instructor. However, I always tell my students that if you get the right codes and you have them in the wrong order, I'm still going to give you credit for that as a correct answer. If it's an assignment that Canvas is grading for me, Canvas may mark it wrong, but I'm going to override it because you got the two right codes. That's what I'm really looking for from you. The order can get tricky, and when you get out into the real world, believe me, you will figure it out. But here in the classroom, I want to give you credit for getting those codes correct in the first place. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here and call this your Intro to ICD lecture, and then I will do another video which is going to give us some introductory coding practice that you can actually do hands-on. That way, if you want to do that coding practice more than one time, you'll find it in a specific video of its own. That way you won't have to advance in the video to a specific time in the video here at the end where I've tacked it all into one video. So make sure when you finish this video, you move on to that one. Thanks.